Welcome back, good hunters, to the Fun Reborn. Today we are hopefully doing the old Yarnum in one shot.
Hunter! Didn't you see the warning? Turn back at once. Old Yarnum, burned and abandoned by men, is now home only to beasts. They are of no harm to those alive. Turn back, for the hunter will face the hunt.
We're introduced to Jura. He's a pretty good guy, honestly. I mean, you might disagree with him, but he's doing things for a cause he believes in. This is old Yarnum. There's some beasts. For all the talk about old Yarnum being burnt to the ground, it's actually in a pretty good state, relatively speaking. We missed that item because we have to chase after the beast. This is so the beasts in these games, whether they're crystal lizards in Dark Souls or whatever these things are, often they're designed to lead you into ambushes. This one's kind of curious because it serves as foreshadowing, effectively. We go down this way. We get the Hunter's Torch. The Hunter's Torch actually is reasonably useful for this area. Enemies in this area do not like to see fire, and it will cause them to shy away, similar to some of the enemies in Dark Souls 2, where they introduced the mechanic of using the torch to scare away enemies who are averse to fire. So the beast, the upgrade material beast, I don't remember what it's called, he leads you down here. You get an item that is useful for the rest of the zone, and you also get a foreshadowing for what will become a very useful shortcut that's otherwise not especially obvious. It's kind of a clever way to use the crystal lizard system in order to teach the players about the zone. And you know, we're not going to get that item right now. I don't even remember what it is. It's nothing too amazing. So let's move on to Jura. You can actually, I believe, see him from here. It's a very similar setup to what we'll see in the Undead Settlement. You can see his chain gun foreshadowing. It's a very similar settlement to what we see in the Undead Settlement in Dark Souls 3 coming up. In that case, the giant with the longbow. And he's on what will eventually be revealed to as a astral clock tower, which is another pretty cool bit of foreshadowing, or at least an equivalent to. These particular enemies, these werewolves, are so small relative to what you expect. The typical, in the last area when we saw werewolves, they were huge. And the crucifixions there were similarly huge. These ones are shorter than you, which is an interesting size shift, and people talk about size shifts in the Souls series being revealing or not revealing, whether or not it's just like, you know, the game design required an enemy of that size, so we did it. And I tend to believe that they have a distinct purpose. More weapon upgrade materials. We already have this one maxed for those bloodstone shards, but it's nice to have backups for getting a secondary weapon, getting a tertiary weapon, replacing the current weapon that you started with one that you're going to pick up and that you want to... Oh. That backdash is really kind of annoying. Alright, so... Like I said, Old Yarnum is supposedly burning. It's not doing all that much burning. It is kind of interesting that the corpses here are burnt to seemingly to release a scent. Perhaps some kind of a warning. The areas, like the Oeden Chapel talks about using... This is one of the tools that they use to make the early areas both, easy and doable for a player, but still threatening. The enemies in themselves are not strong. They do not target very well, but they do attack in groups, so you have to sort of be careful about where you're going. Yeah, Jura. So we're dealing with an area that is supposedly burnt to the ground at some point. It's not currently. That is a mystery that we should be considering. It's kind of funny that the sandbags come back. Sandbags that do not appear to be used for like any kind of military purpose. And Bloodborne is now a cover shooter. Although you don't really do a lot of shooting. We have a sudden size increase, which is set to cue you in that something has changed. There is, I very much believe, a chronological progression through zone areas. We're uncovering kind of like a historical progression of what happened here. We have a broken window, which is, interesting. More hanging corpses, all around a circular building. I don't have anything to say about that at the moment, but we could have dropped down here to ambush that particular enemy. And we have what appear to be explosive barrels, giving you, more foreshadowing. When FromSoft sets up a trap, they want you to not be... They want you to be surprised by it, but they want the surprise to be fair. They want you to try to go get that item. It is not the super safest one. Also kind of funny that for all Jura talks about wanting to protect the beasts, he is very likely to kill them himself during his assault on you. In fact, later on you can ally with him, but... See, this item was covered in barrels. If we went to a straight, we would have been doing not so hot, and he cleared the barrels and the beast for us. Oh, I missed the pop-out. My bad. I didn't think I would trigger it so early. So, the little ones still are little, but the big ones, the covered ones, the ones with head coverings, are now considerably larger. Like the Channeler from Dark Souls 1, they provide buffs to the smaller ones that are nearby once they do a howl. More broken stairwell imagery. Alright. How to proceed. Okay, so people have called this hunter who sort of lurks here Jura's buddy, and it is true that Jura doesn't attack him. What's interesting, though, is that he's not a very high-tech hunter in any sense, and he's using a saw spear, which is fascinating. There's not a lot of, like, showing of people actually using saw spears. But Jura is a member of the Powder Kegs, and the Powder Kegs love flashy, somewhat impractical weaponry, as we'll see shortly. And Saw Spear is not that. We suddenly get to an area where the beasts have poison, which is reasonably threatening. I did want to remark that it's kind of interesting that the crows here drop antidotes. I think that is unique to this particular area's crows. So, I want to posit the possibility that the size differences here are a sort of child-adult distinction. There'll be an area later in the game that is called the orphanage. It has the orphanage key. It has a very similar sort of enemies that you fight, some of which are large and some of which are small. We have a chest. More blood gemstones. Wish I had more to say about this, but I don't right now. So the orphanage. You get the orphanage key, you go in, you fight small enemies plus large enemy. So I think what we're coded as here is, you know, kind of killing children. It's a theme, killing children in these games, and it's not as morbid as it sounds, but it is meant to be morbid on some level. I think they're poisoned because possibly a buff. I talked the other day about Gilbert and mentioning that he chose not to use the flame sprayer. Maybe this is a variant of Old Yarnum where the Red Moon hung low and the beasts rolled the streets and they did not choose to burn it to cinders. And the beasts survived here, and Jura and his kind protected them. But we got some new items. Alright. Rifle Spear is not a weapon that we have the stats for, and we'll probably not likely have the stats for it. This isn't really a blood tinge. Even if it's not a really high level of blood tinge card, but we have the Workshop Heretics, the Powder Kegs. And it's sort of an evolution of the Saw Spear in a sense. Because they're both spears, I guess that's maybe a stretch. They use prototypes. They have a lot of technological emphasis on their weaponry and their equipment. And most interestingly is that they imitate Canehurst, which is a pretty important detail, I think, even if I can't really fully explain it at the moment. But we'll later get more items from the sources of the Powder Kegs, and it tells a story of a group that doesn't really get a lot of focus in the main lore of Bloodborne. But I think that could be a little bit of a mistake. We have some fireproof equipment. I think this has some of the highest fire resistance in the game. Is it related to the powder kegs? Possibly. It's plausible, given the location and such. But again, we're in a variant of... Ooh, you can shoot down here, right? So this next bit. Yeah, you're here. We could go up there and try to talk to Jura. It doesn't work too well until you visit Yahar'gul, which is an interesting detail that I think, again, is important. But I think I want to wait until we do Yahar'gul to address that. And there's also a shortcut that we could use, but I think I'm going to take this honestly at first. You get a view of the area. Some screams so they know. You can jump down. But if you jump down, unless you're running through, it can be pretty overwhelming to deal with everything all at once. What we do have is imagery of a chapel. And lots of lanterns. I don't have a good answer for that, but... I will say that the structure here, I feel, is extremely, extremely reminiscent of the building on Orlando that houses the Painted World. You've got the similar types of ceilings. You've got like a scaffolding system that you can walk across. You could effectively imagine the painting being right over there. And if you take that line of thought... Yeah, I remember you. That camera was frustrating. I don't use transformation attacks nearly as much as I ought to. I think this will be blood vials. No, it's antidotes. Of course it is. I mean, it's thematic. You've got a sense that some of the hunters who went down here were anticipating dealing with being poisoned, and that's why there's so much, I don't remember if there's a second one. There very well might be. Grapple. And you can see the buff on that one, the red eyes. Maybe the antidotes are clear as so. The shoulder tackle these ones do is very much not what you'd expect from werewolves. It's an interesting inclusion. There's another one. Hello. Hey, buddy. I think that dodge was late, but all's well that ends well. And if we take this as a parallel to Orlando, does that make these sets of beasts painting guardians? And does that make whatever's hanging up there the Painted World? And maybe its inhabitant? It's a thought. Sometimes there can be parallels, but the use of the parallel is not as obvious as it seems. That what we're seeing is perpendicular rather than strictly parallel. Really interesting that even the shoulder tackles do poison, but that could... okay, that was not an enemy behind me. That flash of cape. The flurry of swipes looks like a very silly attack, and it's not an especially effective one, but it does recall the hollows in Dark Souls 1 having a similar attack, sometimes using torches. Madman's knowledge. I have a door that doesn't lead to anywhere, although it feels like it ought to. And maybe the Madman's knowledge is where that door initially led to, in some symbolic level. These statues are some of the most distinctly humanoid statues that we'll see in Old Yharnam. They kind of recall some of the statues that show up later in Dark Souls 3. Although at this point the necks start feeling strangely elongated. This repeating statue pattern is not as set as the one in... it's not as set as the one that is in, Highwall Lothric. We have a wolf that's not doing so hot. The blood has been drained from it, which is, an interesting feature given the boss that we are about to see in a short period of time. We have an altar. This is presumably related to where a chalice was acquired. I don't know it well enough to point it out, honestly, but I have heard it said that parts of this altar have a symbol on them somewhere that is associated with the moon presence. That this is where the moon presence may have been initially engaged with, and then maybe eventually disengaged with. But the actual level continues, which doesn't necessarily mean, geological progression. It can just as well be not geographic progression, but chronological progression. One thought is that this is kind of like the statues in Honor Londo. This would be, I think, Gwyn in the middle, but no, in the Painted World room it might be Guinevere in the middle, and so the madness is the fact that Guinevere is no more. Her door is blocked off. This might be the one that is always broken, because there's definitely a recess in here that ought to have something, and it looks very much statue-shaped. That's kind of where I think I would go with this. Anyway, with all that taken care of, let's look at the upper levels, which a little bit backtracking, but we're here for the lore. Also, the windows are extremely bright for where this chapel is relative to all of the buildings around it. Like, it's a brief glimpse into Yharnam before it got, gentrified. Nothing too fascinating here, but if you're trying to get through the area really quickly, don't particularly care about the items, and don't want to fight, you can just jump down, only taking a little bit of fall damage. There's more statue recesses, which again calls back the trio of statues. Well, the trio of the 3-1 statues of Honor Londo. I should take a little more time to stare at things, because I don't get a lot of second takes with Bloodborne. I do wish this would come out on PC just for my own convenience. Anyway, this is the other shortcut through the chapel. Also, the path to Jura's up there. We're not going that way. He will not talk to us again until Yahar Ghul, and he will probably beat us given our current status. This might be, you might remember, this is where the ambush happened once you pass a certain threshold. Looking up can be useful a lot of the times. Anyway, this is reminiscent again of the entrance to Honorlando, the painted room. It even has where the Bloodstar Beast / Moon Presence is hanging from is the chandelier in Honorlando that you can actually knock down. In this case, it's sort of been lowered to serve as, I think, the basis for a crucifixion. Interestingly enough, this design actually sees some repetition in a distantly upcoming area in Bloodborne. When you get repetition in this, references back, you don't always get it in once, but sometimes twice. Blood reality and insight reality, you know? Yeah, I tried to do a Dark Souls 3 jump, and Dark Souls 3 jumps do not work in this, as we remind ourselves constantly, yet never remember. I don't think that item is going to be a huge loss, either for progression or for lore implications. So I'm not going to go back and do it again. We have a bit of a branch. We have more crows. One thing to think about is the parallel between the crows that we see in Yharnam and the Corvians in Dark Souls 3. I like the idea that they're a different race of beasts who are, you know, picking through the runes and building up their own reality from the pebbles. More fantastic use of foreshadowing. You have the motion to draw your attention to it. And also more foreshadowing, as that will be where we're headed. Distinctly less functional, well, not functional, but I suppose potentially functional depending on the roof quality, but much more dilapidated than the chapel we just got through. Anyway, this is the path that we head out to the next area. Blood vials to restore us, but also remind us that we can open a shortcut now, and this dramatically shortens the time that it takes to travel through the zone, since you can jump down to the hunter in front of Jura's area straight from the beginning of the zone, and then just run through him and now get to all the progression that we made. The shortcuts in this area are a little subtle. They take a little while to learn, but they're pretty effective. FromSoft's shortcut design existed in Dark Souls 1. Probably didn't exist so much in Demon Souls. I can't speak to that. It's interesting that this fog is described as warding off the beasts. Yet they seem to be kind of okay hanging out around it, although maybe it makes them do sleeps. Just because incense exists in one area and serves one purpose doesn't mean it serves a consistent purpose throughout the game. And what one civilization thinks of as a beast may not always be what another civilization thinks of a beast. The symbolism of these worlds is slippery. It is intentionally a little misleading in a really cool way. So this zone has a connection to Yarhogel. Literally, only goes the other direction, obviously, because that would be too much to allow. We also first get access to Yarhogel only after we destroy the boss of this area, put her down. I don't really want to fight two of you at the same time. These are much easier than the ones that we fought in Central Yharnam. I think the reaction time on them is pretty slowed down. Now we're going to Foreshadow Alley. Or I should be going to Foreshadow Alley, but I took a wrong turn at Albuquerque. Oh hey, water. Stagnant pool. This particular Old Yharnam is dealing with poison. Stagnant water is very often considered the source of poison in multiple games in this series. Is there anything else? We have some high archways. I think they kind of make sense structurally for what is being built over. Like I think I mentioned in the video for the video that didn't work for Lower Undeadburg. A lot of the theming of the world design in all of these games extends from the concept of Londinium, the city that eventually became London, where Londinium dealt with fires, and there we go. Different iterations would just be built on the runes from the previous fire. Our first use of our site of beast pellets. I think they're poop. I think they're like bloody poop. Dung pies in the Dark Souls 1 vernacular. Pellet has that association in my head. And eventually a character will give you them after they eat. I didn't think he'd bounce out quite so far. Whoops. Oh well, we rallied. If there's one criticism about the shortcut design in this area, is that you get two of them. And the second one comes so closely after the first one. It would be nice if the first one kicked in earlier than it does. The second one is very, very useful for making any boss runs. I think we should hopefully not need any boss runs. Fire paper, like the antidotes, are... I suppose I should... I might actually use fire paper this time, but you may want to have antidotes out. I've never used beast blood pellets, ever. I could try it, but maybe I should save them for the soon upcoming Whirligig Saw time. Because, you know, the Saw Spear and Saw Axe, Saw Cleaver are... certainly two of the best weapons in this game, but counterpoint Pizza Cutter go brrrr. So yeah. I think the part of the lighting things that I was talking about in the last playthrough, the Chalice Dungeon one, still in the archives currently. I talked about some of the lighting shifts, and I believe that might be our new TV, so it didn't show up in the recording, and I feel like it makes it sound like I'm, like, making stuff up, but Yeah, the TV does some weird lighting changes during the turning around in this particular game. And this is where we chase down the beast, the foreshadowed shortcut at the very start. With it open, we can get that item. It's nothing exciting, but you know, closure can be important regardless of whether it's immediately useful. This is where we got the torch. This is one of the harder like jumps to see. It can be super nerve-wracking to figure out like how do I get down any further. But here we are at the end of the shortcut. And we've got, you know, full blood vials, full quicksilver. Pretty good sign overall. This run has been very, very smooth. Something to keep in mind is that the structure of this area, the constant descent into something, it gets used in other parts of this game. The eventual full Yahar goal will have a similar sort of design aesthetic motif. This is a very interesting ambush, using the smoke to hide behind. Like, it's very difficult to meaningfully approach, but if you do, you get like a good jump on the buffer. Not early enough to stop the red eyes, but oh no. Like, this area is not extremely threatening unless you let the buffs get out of control. But the other area I want to like maybe keep in your mind, for those of you who know more of the game, think of this area as kind of a parallel to the fishing hamlet. We're in both cases descending. Both cases there is some degree of bestial plague going on. I want to figure out what the symbolism behind the placement of bold hunter's marks and homeward bones is. Sometimes it's merely a practical consideration. I think I missed the blood beast. Not that big of a deal. We got one of the few areas that looks very agrarian. Some farming, or you know, at least landscaping was going on, which is not extremely common within the city confines of Yharnam in general. I thought there would be... There we go. These ones I think might have the highest HP of any in the area, and possibly the highest poison damage, which makes sense given that we are headed towards the source. We're gonna give the chapel one good look. The root imagery, it's sort of a callback to the Bed of Chaos. About a very dilapidated chapel. With that done, I think it's best to take off the monocular during fights that you anticipate a lot of item switching, potentially. And I'm going to summon Alfred. I don't typically do this, but we didn't bring him along for Cleric Beast, so this is his path. He only is summonable once you talk to him in the Cathedral Ward. And if Alfred's ultimate goal is against Cainhurst, then there's a question of what does the Bloodstarved Beast represent relative to that goal. And Alfred does have the Kirk Hammer. the item that we can only get once we beat the cleric beast, which ties back to him being summonable in a weird way for a cleric beast that you only find out about in a very peculiar sort of pathing. Alright, this shouldn't go badly, but I'm going to item up, which is... playing these fights super honestly can be really fun, but we're trying to do lore. The losing attack on her while she dashes kind of is reminiscent of the gimmick for I wonder if I could have done that couple. The gimmick for the Lost Sinner for Dark Souls 2. You generally want to fire paper more so for the second phase. And I think it's, given the saw cleaver, it's curiously not serrated in the extended form. And having serrated plus the fire bonuses are nice. I'm gonna play everything safe. I want to get done with this. Smooth run. Alfred doesn't make it, but sucks to be him. No insight for you. Or maybe you do get insight. I don't remember how co-op works in this. We have some form of an altering, and the wrappings in this case almost look snake-like. And this is the most distinctly not human-looking statue. There's a bestial aspect to its humpback, almost like the melty one in Wayden Chapel, or like the pilgrims from Dark Souls 3. And the beard starts to almost look like tentacles. I should get... We don't really need these on for the moment. And get back our more important item. They're always looking up. Either looking up or like looking down crying. What's also pretty curious is that this altar gets replicated later on, but with very masculine quality in heading towards the research hall in the DLC. A presumably dying individual and 3 assistants. Should you have the time and you need some antidotes, we got a bonus stash behind the altar, as it were. The walls are... the ceilings are just completely gone, showing a level of, like I said, dilapidation that is rather extreme. I think that is it, though. We can... look at the chalice. I imagine that would be maybe worth doing. If I can remember what it's under... the icon with the big chalice. So... I think there's an implication here that partaking in communion is a very sort of vampiric process, given that we fought a blood-starved beast. And there's two ways to interpret Blood-Starved Beast, and there's probably more ways once we start introducing whatever the Japanese name was. Is the beast starving and just it needs more blood to consume? Or is the beast starved because the beast has been drained? Blood Saints show up later on as an thematic element, and did the Blood-Starved Beast / Moon Presence begin as a... Did she begin as, you know, someone donating her blood, and then that blood is what became poisoned? Having just left, there was one thing I saw during the loading that I kind of want to look back at, but when did the poisoning occur and why? Was she always just poisonous from the very start, or was that something that was acquired during the constant communion? This relief is fascinating, but it also is fairly low quality. I want to say it almost is reminiscent of a particular piece of art of a dude in 16, 17, 1800s doing surgery with a bunch of people watching, which would tie again to, you know, this sort of end-of-life care motif going on. Roughly the same thing on the back. The detail is just so muddy that there's not a lot that you can derive from it. I wonder if there's something to be said here about, is it the same individual? Is it the same individual making two choices? Is it the start of the choice and the ending of the choice? There's a lot of symbolic storytelling going on, and you can't really answer it by looking at the area in itself. You kind of sort of have to find what it serves as a... I can't even remember the term when you have a puzzle or a code. You're looking for it as like what it becomes the Rosetta Stone for. What storyline in all of these games would it fit into? So we got the chalice. We can set up chalices here. I don't know. I do think I'm going to fit them in at some point, and we got the two ritual blood from the Moon Presence altar. I'll just call it that in order to do our first run, but it's not going to be today, and I'm not sure where I'm going to fit it in. It might just be sort of like bonus content because they're interesting, but they don't easily fit into the rest of the run. Like I said, we can't upgrade this any further, but we can upgrade a different item. I don't think either of these will be the one for us, even though I do find myself missing the saw spear. You can upgrade your pistol, but not a huge priority, especially when you neglect using it as much as I do. A couple new blood gems. I think this is probably the better choice. Like, 3.3% damage is not huge, but 1 HP recovering as slow as it is might add up to something. That, nothing to do there. But we can talk to Gehrman. He's popped up back now that the Blood-Starved Beast is done. There's, I think, a patterning to when he appears and when he disappears, but I haven't been able to figure it out.
The healing church and the black ministers who belong to it were once guardians of the hunters in the times of the hunter Luffy. They worked and forged weapons in their unique workshop. Today, most ministers don't recall the hunters, but they have much to offer you. And so, heed the message of your forebears. Ascend to ardent channel.
It's curious because we have kind of ascended to what we think of as Odin Chapel. Odin. And, you know, just because of the Tomb of Odin doesn't make it Odin Chapel. Reasonably good point. That kind of suggests where we're headed to next is the real Wooden Chapel. And there's something I wonder about. Why is that? Anyway, the sound quality has gone to shit now. And we're done, so I think I will call it to that. Recording early enough to hit those was not a thing I've run into previously. But, thanks for watching. Next time will probably be Dark Souls 3 Undead Settlement. Chance I'll go back to Dark Souls 1 Depths first. And I'm not entirely... There's a little bit ahead in Bloodborne that I'm still figuring out where to put it in. We've got kind of like 2 side areas before the next big progression point, and I don't know where they fit in exactly, but we'll figure that out. Anyway, thank you for watching. So long, good hunters, and may you find your worth in the waking.